Well, good afternoon, everyone. My name's Michael. I'll be your host for this afternoon's webinar on what's new in GP 2015 R2. So I know it's a bit of a long title, but the focus today is on the R2 release of the GP 2015 suite. So we're going to get started. We've got our little opening slide there. If we just jump to the next slide. Before we actually dive into the real content of this afternoon's session, just a small amount of logistics and housekeeping. So firstly, you can ask a question. You can do that within the webinar itself. So on the bottom right-hand corner of your screen, in the preview screen there, you can actually type a question in at any time. So as soon as you've got a question, just add it into that questions box. And we are leaving some time at the end of the session today to actually answer those questions, and we'd hope to get through them all, but if we can't, don't worry, because we will follow up with the answers post the session and get those out to you as quickly as we possibly can. So please ask your questions along the way and we'll get to them, if not during the session, straight after. We are recording the session today, so we will be presenting a number of things. Don't worry, you don't have to take screenshots or scribble down all the notes, because we are recording the session, and we will send you a link to the recording of the session, which will be up on our YouTube channel site at the end of the session or presentation. So you will be able to either rewatch, look at something that you may have missed or skipped, and also share it with others in your organisation. So if you do see something that you want to share within your organisation, you can send that around as well. So today, while I'm your host, the real content will be presented by Melita. Melita Curry is one of our senior GP consultants here at PA and has been with us for a number of years, working specifically in the GP application and already across the recently released R2 features. So Melita will actually take us through the content today. And while I said we'll allow time for questions at the end, in reality it'll be Melita that will be fielding most of those questions. So thanks Melita for doing that for us. And I'll now hand over to you to take us through the session. Thanks, everyone.
Okay, so as Michael said, I'll be going through GP 2015 R2. It was only just recently released in the last, I think, 3 or 4 weeks. So there's a couple of new features. Microsoft have changed their release with all the service packs now. And each new service pack release comes with additional functionality. So in addition to any fixes that may occur, you're also getting a few new features with every service pack being released. So whilst 2015 came out towards the end of last year, obviously it had a whole host of new features. These are just the new features that were released with the latest service pack R2. So there's a list of features there, and what I'll cover is each one individually in just in an overview format. And any questions, feel free to ask at the end of the session. Obviously, as Michael said, you just need to key your question into the box that you've got there. So the first feature that we've got is the purchasing all-in-one document view. And what this means is that from the creditor card, you can have a look at any outstanding transactions, payments, and do any sort of view within the screen. So I have got a bit of an example of some of these just to show you what it looks like, because the screenshots don't come out that well. So if we're looking at a creditor, we can come in here. Now if you're using purchase orders, if you're using receipting, all those, the last 5 transactions display. I'm doing this on a test database that doesn't really have a lot of data on it at the moment because this has only been a new release. But you've got the ability to scroll through the previous 5 and the next 5 transactions. And under each heading, you've got the ability to do different filters. So you can filter between different areas here. So it's just a purchasing all-in-one view, giving you the capability of snapshotting a creditor and having a look at the most recent transactions for that specific creditor. Okay. So the next feature in R2 is workflow. So workflow has been available in previous versions, but the new component is accounts payable transaction approval. So what this allows you to do is submit and approve each transaction in the payables transaction entry window. So it follows a workflow routing for somebody to approve via email or via GP, and that then enables, say, accounts payable to be able to post that transaction. So the approval goes through the email notification process, and you've also got the PM batch approval workflow type as well. So there's just a workflow maintenance screen that enables you to set up what if there's a dollar value limit, who the approver is, and who the next approver. So you can have multiple layers of approval within the workflow component. So as you see on the left-hand side here, we've got different types of workflow approval. So R2 payables transaction approval is one of the new features now available. Another new feature with workflow is the document attach. So what you can do is you can add a document to a transaction or a record using the GP document attachment feature. So that could be, for example, you could attach on an item, you could attach a PDF of the item, or you could attach some sort of terms and conditions against the debtor, all those sorts of things. And then when the workflow is sent, the attachment will also be sent with the workflow. So that's the ability for the person that's approving that transaction to be able to see any supporting documentation they may require. So, examples here, you can enter a payables invoice, you could scan it in and attach it, and then submit the invoice for approval. So when the approver receives the email, they'll get the invoice and the attachment shows the scanned invoice. So that capability enables the approver to look at the document before they approve the transaction. So the document attach feature is new, and it's also available to be able to be used in the PM batch approval, the purchase order approval, the requisition approval, and vendor maintenance. So there's now a new feature with analytical accounting transaction lists. So there's just a few improvements to the smart lists and the Excel reports. So there's just additional columns that you're able to add now. Microsoft have looked at what people's needs are and given you the ability to search on more information. Microsoft have made available a self-server user type, and what that means is that you can create a user with limited access, and they're able to perform the tasks such as entering project time and expenses if you're using project accounting, and also creating a requisition. One of the other new features is combining the general ledger inquiry, historical and current. So what that means is, now if you recall, if you ever go through the inquiry screen, you've got, I'll just pop that there. You've got summary detail. In current versions, you have historical summary and historical detail. That is now no longer. Effectively, you'll just have the drop down of the years here, and you just go through either the summary or the detail. So that option is available in the summary inquiry, detail inquiry, and account summary, and any go-tos or drawbacks also go back to that window instead of having to select the open or the historical year. So that's just a bit of a screenshot of that. SQL View Designer. So within SmartList Designer, a user can send a SmartList through workflow to create a SQL view based on the SmartList query. So if you're using workflow, you can send a SmartList through there for approval. You can also then use it to for people outside of GP to look at specific reports. Another change, the SmartList now automatically displays the debits first, then credits. In previous versions, credits were before debits. So that was able to be manually changed, but that's now automatically, when it's upgraded, that will then change the way you view SmartList and Excel reports. So now, one of the other new features, historical received not invoiced report. So there's a new SQL reporting services report that is now available. That's given, that's added new functionality with cut-off date. So if people are using purchase order processing and they're using any of the SQL reporting services reports, there's some new additions on those reports. So just a bit of a screenshot with the cut-off date being available for the reports that you're printing. Customers over credit limit. There's a change to the setup window where you're able to select an icon display over credit limit, and what that means is when you're keying the transaction in, you'll see a visual cue. So if you notice there, there's the little yellow triangle there, and that just warns me that the customer is over the credit limit. Now you can have the visual cue, and you can also set some passwords on your credit limits or the debtor hold feature if that's something that you need to utilise. And last but not least, enabling email for all sales and purchasing forms. So in prior versions, not all forms were available. There's all the forms all sales and purchasing forms are now available with the emailing capability. So that's supported from the transaction entry window and the sales document window as well. So in prior versions it was just the blank documents, so now it's any document format. Okay, so that covers just the new features for the latest service pack release, and I'll hand it over back to Michael to deliver any questions.
All right, thanks Melita. So this might be where it gets a little bit more challenging. So we'll start this journey together. So firstly, thanks for taking us through those new features there. So this is, as you stated, we've had the 2015 release. Now this is just the focus on the R2 features on top of 2015. So we've got a couple of questions that have already come through. So I'll just take this opportunity, if anyone's got any other questions they want to just type them in, please do. And we'll just go through and ask them now, Melita, and see how we go. As I said, either if we don't get to it or if we need to check it and get back to people, we'll do that as a follow-up to this session. So the first question, I'll just read it out here to you. So how do you access the new SQL Reporting Services report?
Okay, so basically when GP is loaded, there are some pre-formatted SQL Services reports that come with the system, and reporting services just needs to be loaded, and you can access those via a link. So
okay, so it's just another report.
Yeah, it's just another mechanism that you can, basically click on a report.
Okay. Okay. Excellent. We've got a question here regarding, so with the all-in view facility, so it's payables related, so the question is, will debtors cards have the all-in view facility? So that might be a
Yeah, they haven't put that in at the moment, but I wouldn't be surprised if that's in the next release. I mean, what they do is they put it through one process, and I guess that's probably something that maybe we don't have any information on the next release as yet, but I wouldn't be surprised if that's something that becomes available.
Yeah, so good point there. So it's not available right now in this release, but certainly we could see that it's something coming down the line. Okay, a licensing question on payables workflow. So do you have to have a GP license for the payables workflow?
Okay, so you need to have, there's different levels of licensing. You've got the full user license, and that's what most people use to process transactions. You've got a self-server user license, and then you've got a limited user license. So depending upon what the person is doing, so if they need to raise a requisition, then you would look at the self-server user type. If they need to go through and process things like they actually need to print a purchase order and they need to do any processing, that would be where you'd need a full user license. But if they want inquiry access and those sorts of things, then you need to look at a limited user. So depending on what requirements you have would depend on what user you would go with, and obviously there's different costs associated with it. So take, for example, a self-server user type, Michael, I think from memory is about $60.
Yes, that's right, yep.
And the limited user is $600. So what you'd be best doing is having a look at what your requirements are for your different users to work out what different types of users you would require.
Okay, thank you. So another question. Now we do have quite a lot of questions coming through, so just as a heads up for everyone, if we don't get to the questions, please don't think it's because we're ignoring them. We're just going to run short of time, but we will answer them and follow up after the session. So we've got a question regarding workplace. It's a combination question. Does the AP workflow work with workplace?
Okay, if you had workplace, well, it depends on what you're using. I mean, workplace is effectively a requisitioning system. And on top of that, you can attach expenses and checks and a few things like that. So if you had workplace, you possibly wouldn't use workflow. But in saying that, workflow is available in additional areas, say like a GL batch and different areas like that. So could you use them in conjunction? So could you create a requisition and then have the purchase order flowing into GP and then follow a workflow path? That's a very tricky question, and I'm not 100% sure of the answer, but I guess the issue that you would have is that within workflow, if you're raising a requisition and somebody's approved it in workplace, then the purchase order becomes available as a PDF in workplace. So then if it gets routed into GP and then it has to go through a workflow process again, you'd question why you would do that. So I guess my question would be, what exactly are you looking at? And maybe it's more process information. You know, we'd have to look at what your process is and what your requirement is before, you know, making a definitive answer on that.
And what we can do on that one, Melita, is, well, we haven't named names when I ask the questions. We do know who has asked the question, so we can follow up with that individual or organisation after the session.
Yep.
Okay, next question. Now, I think we're getting a bit of a theme here, Melita. Another workflow question, would you believe it? So can general ledger journals be workflowed for approval?
Yes, they can.
Oh, wow, that was an easy one.
I think, yeah.
We like the easy.
I say yes because I haven't done a workflow with GL before, but hang on, I'll get back on that, but I'm positive that that came through in 2015. So my answer would be yes, but if it's no, we'll come back to that person.
Yeah, not so much specific to R2, but I think GL workflow is available.
Yeah, I think that came through in 2015.
Yeah. Okay, we've got, wow, we have another workflow question. Are you ready for the next one, Melita?
Yep.
So this is very specific. So if there are two levels of approval process, once the first approval approves the invoice, will GP automatically send it to the second person for approval? So this sounds like a multi-tiered approval process.
Yes, they will. So that just follows the path that you've set up.
Okay, excellent.
So just to get back to that question about general ledger batch approval, workflow is in general ledger for batches. There's also receivables batch approval. Under purchasing, you've got payables batch, payables transaction, purchase order, purchase requisition, vendor approval. And then there's the Smart List designer view approval as well. So they're all your different types of workflow that are currently available.
And I think you've raised a very good point there when you said currently available. We certainly do know that the approval piece within GP has been well received by all clients, and more development is continuing with that approval all the time. So more approval processes and additional functionality within the approvals and workflows is coming out in future releases as well. Okay, next question. Are you ready for the next one?
Yep.
Okay. So does an AP transaction hit the general ledger the moment it is approved by the approver, or is there another step?
So the batch still would require processing. So the transaction's still sitting in AP, but unable to be posted until approved. So it's a bit like a purchase order unable to be printed until it's been approved if you're using PO approvals.
Okay, so we're not bypassing any of the business logic within GP?
No.
Okay. All right. We did have a question on pricing, but I think you've covered that one off already. You mentioned the self-service user, so just the pricing on that one, I think we answered that already, so that was only $60 for that user.
But bear in mind that the self-service user can enter in timesheets and project expenses and raise requisitions. So they're the only couple of things that a self-server user can do. So then you've got the limited user that can also do inquiries and a few other things.
Okay, excellent. I think just just kind of extrapolate on that a little bit in terms of the best user licensing for your particular requirements. That's something that we can help you with, either from a consulting or an account management perspective at time of upgrading or migrating to 2015 or upgrading to the R2 release as well. So we can work through that with all clients in that regard. Okay, I think that's it from a questions perspective. There was a couple of questions that were duplicated, so haven't asked them all. Okay, we've got one more question. We might just try one more, Melita, before we wrap up.
Yeah, sure.
So can the workflow for invoice approval be directed to different approvers based on GL coding?
Okay, that's a very interesting question. The answer to that is yes, you should be able to do it. We'd have to have a look at your requirements. So as a general rule, I say yes, but you could also direct it based on creditor and a few other options available. So I haven't done, just to preface that, I haven't looked at the payables at this stage because it's only been released in the last couple of weeks, so I've not done any attachments with it or any approvals. So, but when I had a quick look at it, it did look as though it does do that.
Okay, so again, Melita, we can just do a check on that and follow up because, as I stated before, we know who asked the question, so we can respond to that specifically. All right, well look, that's wraps things up nicely from a timing perspective with regard to the questions that come through. So thanks for asking those questions. Obviously, workflow was an interesting and hot topic, and we can see more coming down the line from Microsoft regarding the workflow functionality within GP, which is great. So just to wrap up, we've just got one final slide there after the questions. Melita, if we can just put that contact information up. So the call to action specifically today is around what to do next following this session. And because we're talking about here an upgrade or updating, whether you're moving from an older version of GP, so not just 2015 or 2015 itself, please contact your account manager and we can discuss that with you and help you through that process. And not sure who your account manager is, obviously you can contact Fraser. Fraser was actually the person that reached out to you with the webinar and the session today. So just finally, before we say goodbye, as you exit the session today, you will actually have a pop-up short little survey, just a couple of questions that we'll ask while you're exiting the session. At that time, you can actually indicate whether or not you're interested in more information and contacting your account manager to follow up on that 2015 R2 release. So please take the opportunity just to select yes on that question if you'd like us to contact you regarding the R2 functionality. Please also, if you're not yet on 2015 and you are interested in upgrading, you can take that same opportunity to respond to that question right there at the very end. So finally, thank you, Melita, for taking us through the new features within R2. Workflow was certainly a hot topic, which is great to see. A lot of interest there. Thank you, everyone, for attending the session today. As mentioned, we will get a copy of the recording out to you so you can